It started out as just another quiet morning in my cabin tucked deep in the Sierra Nevadas. The air was crisp with pine and stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of deer or the call of a jay. I'd moved out here for peace. Off the grid, away from the noise and pressure of city life, with nothing but trees for neighbors. What I didn't expect was that trouble would find me anyway, not in the form of wild animals or weather, but from the wall of a community I wasn't even technically part of. Technically, the edge of my property bordered a private mountain community, a development of wealthy second homeowners and retirees with too much time and too little sense. My land was deeded separately, never signed into their HOA agreement, but that didn't stop them from constantly trying to enforce their will. It started with the letters, nicely worded at first, asking me to maintain consistent aesthetics with the surrounding community. Then came the warnings about my noncompliant structure, even though my cabin had been grandfathered in decades ago. I ignored it all, like anyone with a lick of common sense would. But they didn't like being ignored. That morning, I was inside boiling coffee over the wood stove. The sun had just crested the ridge, and a golden light streamed through the trees. I hadn't had cell service in days, which was normal. If people wanted to reach me, they had to drive up in person. That's when I heard the tires crunching gravel, fast. Not just one vehicle either. Several. I peeked through the blinds and saw 3 black SUVs coming up my private road. No insignias, no lights, no markings. My heart didn't skip a beat, not yet. I figured maybe the county was coming to talk about the easement dispute again. Maybe Forest Service. But then I saw the men step out. Tactical vests, rifles, sidearms. At first glance, they looked like a SWAT team, but something about them was off. The gear was mismatched. No body cams. No badges. One guy had the word enforcement taped to his vest like a last-minute Halloween costume. My stomach turned. This wasn't official. And if it wasn't official, it was dangerous. They approached fast, scanning the perimeter like they were breaching a compound in Afghanistan. I slipped away from the front window, grabbing the shotgun from its mount. I didn't point it at anyone. I wasn't looking to start a firefight, but I wasn't about to be ambushed unarmed either. I eased into a position by the back door, listening. They didn't knock. They shouted, "Come out of the house. Now." Their voices were urgent, angry, but not coordinated like trained operators. More like men playing soldier. I still didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but I wasn't stepping outside just to get zip-tied by weekend warriors. I called out, "Who are you? What's your authority?" "HOA enforcement. You are trespassing and in violation of community code. Step out now." That's when it clicked. HOA enforcement. With rifles. No sheriff's deputy would say that. No real SWAT team is deployed by a homeowners association. These weren't cops. They were hired thugs. Private security, maybe even residents themselves. My heart started pounding now, not from fear, but fury. They'd crossed a line. A big one. "I don't recognize your authority," I yelled back. "You're on private property without a warrant. Leave now or I will consider this an armed trespass." There was a pause outside. A couple voices argued. Then someone barked, "He's armed." As if that wasn't obvious. I didn't make a move, didn't want to escalate. But they already had. They began circling the cabin, shouting threats, talking about breaching, like they were military. I saw one guy trying to shoulder my back door. That's when I made the call. Not to the HOA, not to the sheriff. I triggered the silent alert. Most people wouldn't know what that means, but I'd set it up long ago. I had friends, real ones, who watched my back. Ex-military, off-grid operators. We had an agreement. If the alert ever went out, they'd come running. Fast, quiet, armed. 10 minutes later, just as one of the fake cops started smashing the kitchen window with the butt of his rifle, they arrived. 3 figures, camouflaged and quiet as ghosts, flanked the property. I saw one of them appear like a wraith behind the guy at the window and put a suppressed rifle to the back of his head. "Drop it," was all he said. All hell broke loose then. Shouting. Confusion. The HOA crew spun around, some raising their weapons, some trying to run. My team didn't fire a shot. They didn't have to. Within 60 seconds, the so-called enforcers were disarmed, face down in the dirt, screaming about their rights and how they were just following orders. That's when I finally stepped out. I walked past them, dozen or so men now zip-tied with plastic cuffs, stripped of their gear, and I looked for the leader. I found him sitting against the bumper of one of the SUVs, red-faced and sputtering. "What the hell is wrong with you people?" I asked. "You think you can play army just because you don't like my cabin?" He tried to speak but couldn't string a sentence together. I turned to my guys. "Call the sheriff. Let's see what he thinks of a fake SWAT raid by a homeowners association." One of them nodded and walked off with a sat phone. I stood there, breathing the mountain air again. Peace restored. But I knew this was just the beginning. They had no idea what they'd walked into. And I had a feeling they were going to find out. The door barely hung on its hinges after the initial impact, the echo of the battering ram still bouncing around the inside of the cabin as they poured in. 4 men in dark uniforms, no visible badges, weapons raised, their eyes scanning the room like they expected to find a drug den. What they found instead was a man who had been preparing for this very moment for years. They didn't know who I was. Not really. To them, I was just some guy refusing to comply with an HOA's arbitrary rules about paint color, fencing height, or some nonsense like the angle of a satellite dish. But they didn't realize I'd once done work the government doesn't talk about. They didn't know about the months I spent embedded in places where backup never came. Or how, when I left that life, I built this cabin off-grid not just for peace, but because I knew someday peace might end. When the first guy came in, sweeping left with his rifle, he shouted something that didn't sound like standard police lingo. It was sloppy, too aggressive, like he was trying to sound tactical but didn't know the script. I was behind the wood stove, crouched low, weapon trained but finger off the trigger. I wanted to be wrong about what was happening. I wanted this to be a mistake that ended with paperwork and apologies. But as the second man kicked over my tool chest and started cursing about finding the files, I knew this wasn't sanctioned. There were 4 of them. The third guy stood near the hallway, guarding a path that led to the back room, a dead end. The fourth lingered outside, maybe on lookout. I counted steps, breaths, angles. Every second they stood there, they revealed more. Their weapons weren't standard issue. 2 of them carried AR-15s, one had a pump shotgun with no serials. No body cams. No radios on the shoulder. No proper callsign communication. These weren't cops. They were hired. Private. Maybe ex-military, but not well trained. Not anymore. They didn't check corners. They didn't cover each other. They moved like people used to. Getting their way with fear, not force. When the third guy took a step closer to the hallway, he caught a glint of the steel embedded in the floorboards. I saw him pause, look down, and then his eyes flicked toward me, too late. I hit the remote under the stove and the cabin's defenses kicked in. Thick steel shutters slammed down over the windows. Panic hit them immediately, all 4 realizing they were now inside a steel box, one they didn't control. The lights cut out. Emergency LEDs flicked on in deep red, casting them in shadows like prey caught in a trap. I didn't fire. Not yet. The red light did more damage than a bullet would have. It stripped away their confidence. "Drop your weapons," I called from behind the stove. "Put your hands where I can see them and sit your asses down." They hesitated. The first guy aimed toward my voice and fired. Bad idea. The ricochet from the steel panel behind me cracked through the air, deafening and bright. The second man screamed, grabbing his ear. He hadn't even realized the acoustic rebound would destroy their equilibrium. These amateurs thought they were storming a retiree's weekend getaway. They had no idea it was designed more like a forward operating base. I moved fast, flanked around the side wall, using the blind spots they ignored. I had them separated within 30 seconds. The one near the hallway was on the ground, dazed. The second was yelling about his ear, disoriented. The first one was still armed but twitching, uncertain. I disarmed the one on the floor, zip-tied his hands, kicked his rifle to the corner. As I moved to the second, he lunged. I sidestepped, drove his shoulder into the wall. He went down hard. That left the shooter. You fire again, I warned, and I'm not going to be as forgiving. He hesitated, looked toward the hallway, maybe thinking his buddies would rally. They didn't. I don't think you know who you're messing with. He barked. No, I replied, stepping into the light, rifle at the ready, I don't think you do. The look on his face when he saw I was calm, measured, and armed, not panicked, not pleading, told me everything. This wasn't their first illegal job, but it might be their last. Then came the voice from outside. Hey, what the hell's going on in there? The fourth guy, still outside, hadn't entered, probably the one with the getaway vehicle. I could hear the engine idling out front, maybe a black SUV, maybe something stolen. I moved to the side window, flipped the outer camera feed on the small monitor embedded in the wall. Sure enough. Black Suburban, no plates. I grabbed the loudspeaker mic and flipped the exterior channel on. Your friends are down. You've got 30 seconds to drop your weapon and lie face down on the gravel, or I'm sealing this place and calling the feds. And I've got everything on tape. He didn't respond at first. Then I saw movement. The Suburban's passenger door opened. He stepped out, looking around like maybe someone else would save him. But the woods were empty. Just trees, birds, and about 5 different surveillance drones I'd flown earlier, now circling overhead. He dropped the gun, sat on the gravel, hands behind his head. Inside, I zip-tied the last of them, made sure their weapons were disabled, and then went to the secure comms unit. I had 2 contacts. One federal, one private. Both owed me favors from a time long before I disappeared into these hills. I didn't call 911. This wasn't local PD territory. This was something darker. The moment I gave them the location, I burned the cabin's internal drives. Not because I was hiding something, but because anyone who'd send fake cops with live ammo over HOA complaints was working a much larger play. 30 minutes later, 2 unmarked helicopters touched down in the clearing. Men in real tactical gear swept in. No words exchanged. They knew what they were walking into. I handed over the zip-tied intruders, made my report brief and exact, and then stepped back into the trees. As the choppers lifted off with the fake cops in custody, one of the agents paused before boarding. He turned back to me and said, "You just made some enemies." I nodded. Let them come. Because next time, I wouldn't let them walk out alive. Was.